I know.
So this is the last, it's gonna be the last session we do on angels. Just wanted to give you a heads up that we start something new next week. I have books to hand out for you for beginning next week. We're gonna be doing the case for Christ. And we're gonna ask you to read chapter 1, I think, right, Larry? The format's going to be different. It's going to be more of a just a discussion and participatory thing. I'm not going to be up here. There might be someone facilitating, but it's going to be more of a discussion kind of thing. What was said in the text? What did we get out of it? You can argue about it a little bit. Just whatever. And we're going to kind of. There's like 13 chapters. So we're going to have books for everybody. So that's not a problem. If you need a book, we have 24 copies here. And I think we had 30 on order. Don't worry about it. Well, we can, if you want to make a contribution, that's great. But I mean, Manny Yu is a benefactor.
14 chapters in 8 or 6 for other stuff.
Well, I think we're doing 14,
Oh, great.
I think there might be one week that's combined.
Super.
But it's going to go through, and it's by Lee Strobel. I think you guys know Lee Strobel. He was the teaching pastor at Willow Creek for many years. He's sort of a former atheist. He's a Chicago Tribune reporter, and he kind of has a mind for legal. I don't know if he's a trained lawyer or not.
Are all those people let in?
Yeah, they're all let in.
Oh, okay. You get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not raise their hands.
And where'd you find the full screen?
On my computer. I'm poking around on this computer.
Interesting. That's tricky.
It's just me having a technical brain cramp.
That's tricky.
Technology brain cramp. So that's what's coming. Today I give you a handout titled Angel of the Covenant.
Yeah.
That's the first chapter of a book I just ordered that's solely about the angel of the Lord. It's 447 pages. That's what we're doing after. You could do a whole, I'm going to tell you, we could do a whole series on the angel of the Lord. It's sort of eye-opening.
Yeah.
And hopefully we open your eyes a little bit today. That's what today's about. This is just the first chapter. I thought it was a good summary that leads into that book of 447 pages. Michael Heiser, Dr. Heiser writes one of the forwards in it. So he's, as you know, I'm pretty high on his scholarship and work that he did here. And these guys go even deeper. So let me open us in prayer and then we get going. We're going to listen to RC and then we'll go from there. Gracious Lord, we want to know more about you. We want to know more about your creation. And we just want to be mindful of all that you are and all that you have made. Open our eyes and open our hearts to receive your truth. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I can mute her, I think. Hey, Sally, I'm going to mute you. All right. So far. So, to just give you kind of a brief. So hopefully, what do you all think about the angel of the Lord? What do you know? Tell me what you know about the angel of the Lord.
That's about it.
Well, isn't he thought of as a Christophany?
You're onto something.
He rides a white horse.
Well, okay. Anybody else?
There's a strong debate whether it's an angel or the Lord. I mean, it's kind of.
There won't be any debate after today.
Okay.
He's a good wrestler.
He is.
Beat up Jacob.
What we're gonna learn is that the angel of the Lord's no angel at all. Okay. And here's a fun fact. After the incarnation, after Christ is born, there's no more mention of the angel of the Lord. The New Testament, the Old Testament is shot through
Right.
with references to the angel of the Lord. And sometimes it's not phrased quite that way. Sometimes it's phrased a little differently. And that's kind of the stuff that big book gets into. Every single instance, I think probably they document where the angel of the Lord is represented in the Old Testament. It's all over the place. The other thing I learned, I don't think RC is going to go into it in his talk. The Jews, we always think of as being very monotheistic. Only God the Father, nothing else, right? Kind of that was it. It's not really the case. Before Jesus, the Jews kind of had a concept of really two Yahweh. There were two elements to Yahweh. And after Christ, they kind of ratcheted that down. Okay. So I found that to be interesting. So at any rate, this is RC, quite aged now. I was looking at I saw something that she did like a montage of RC Sproul when he was like a young buck wearing, shaded glasses and a 70s haircut. It was crazy because they went through the years. But what they did was he was saying the same message. They just took it in different eras in his life. And this is probably, he's fairly older here. But he's going to talk about, now he's talking about the burning bush, but that's part of the story here.
We continue now with our study of Moses and the burning bush that we find in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. And I'm going to continue in this session looking at the manifestation of the glory of God in the Shekinah that we looked at briefly in our last encounter. Before I do that, I'm going to relate a narrative of something that happened to me when I was a sophomore in college. I was a philosophy major, and my philosophy professor invited me to go to Philadelphia for a philosophical conference on a Dutch philosopher by the name of Herman Dooyeweerd at Westminster Theological Seminary. And this was in the old days when the original faculty that had come out of Princeton to start that school were intact. Gresham Machen had already died, but Cornelius Van Til, John Murray, E.J. Young, Ned Stonehouse, and the other great stars of that faculty were there for that conference. And when I went there and listened to the first session in the morning, the whole thing was so far over my head. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't want to, I felt very foolish, and I didn't want to open my mouth and reveal how foolish I actually was. So I kept my mouth shut, and then we had a lunch break. And I was sitting across from the professor of philosophy from the seminary, and I was eating the soup, and he said to me, "Young man," he said, "do you believe God is transcendent or immanent?" And I literally spit the soup out of my mouth, because I didn't know what the word transcendent meant. And I didn't know what the word immanent meant with respect to the things of God. And so here my ignorance was completely exposed to this learned professor. And he had mercy on me, and he began to answer the question for me. And he said, well, the answer to the question is yes. Is God transcendent or immanent? Yes, because he is both transcendent and immanent. His transcendence refers to that sense in which God is above and beyond the created order. It refers to his exalted majesty, the way in which he is other or different from all the things that he creates. And yet at the same time, God is not just this remote deity who exists somewhere east of the sun and west of the moon, outside of our ken, but God also makes himself present with us. He is also immanent. He is immanent in his creation by virtue of his omnipresence. He's immanent historically through the person of Christ. And he's also immanent through his visitation to this planet in redemptive history. And we see this combination of transcendence and immanence in the burning bush. Because the glory, the fire, was a manifestation of the transcendent God, of the Creator, which you don't normally find in bushes. But here he is making himself known by manifesting his presence here in this world, by visiting Moses in this encounter in the desert. Now, in our last session, we talked about theophany. And I want to explore a little bit more of that, going beyond the broad category of theophany to another term that we have called Christophany. Christophany refers to a pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ. That is, it addresses the question, do we find Christ, or the second person of the Trinity, anywhere manifested in the Old Testament? And there are several passages in the Old Testament that biblical scholars believe, and I certainly believe, indicate the presence of Christophany. Let me go back for a moment first to Genesis, this time to Genesis 14, where we read this brief encounter that Abraham had with this mysterious person whose name was Melchizedek. We read in verse 18 of chapter 14, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, for he was the priest of the God Most High. And he blessed Abraham and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And Abraham gave him a tithe of all that he had. Now, this mysterious figure is very important to the author of Hebrews in the New Testament. Why? Because the Bible teaches that Jesus is not only our king after the line of David, but he is now entered into the heavenly holy of holies as our great high priest. And so people raise the question, how can he be a king and a priest? The Davidic king has to come from the tribe of Judah. And Jesus did come from the tribe of Judah. But the priests came through what tribe? The tribe of Levi and Aaron. And so we speak of the Levitical priesthood or the Aaronic priesthood. And since Jesus did not come from that line, questions were arising as how he could legitimately be called the great high priest of his people. Well, as you know, the author of Hebrews answers that question by showing that Jesus is a priest not of the Levitical order, not of the Aaronic priesthood, but a priest after the order of Melchizedek. referring back to the passage that I just read to you. This Melchizedek, who has no parents, no genealogy, and that makes the question, was he a real historical character of flesh and blood, or was something else going on here? His name, Melchizedek, means King Zedekiah of righteousness. And he is called the King of Salem, which means peace. So this mysterious person is known in the Old Testament as the King of righteousness and as the King of peace. Attributes that the New Testament, of course, apply to Jesus. And Abraham meets this mysterious priest of the Most High God, and he pays a tithe to Melchizedek and receives a blessing from Melchizedek. So the author of Hebrews makes a lot out of this. He says, wait a minute. The greater blesses the lesser, and the lesser pays tithe to the greater. So in Hebrew categories, it's very plain here that Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. And in Hebrew categories, the Father is greater than the Son greater than the grandson, and so on down the line. And so the way the author of Hebrews reasons, he says Levi is lesser than Abraham, lesser than Isaac, lesser than Jacob. Now, if Levi is subordinate to Abraham, and Abraham is subordinate to Melchizedek, what does that mean? QED. Levi is subordinate to Melchizedek. So Melchizedek is the greater priesthood. But again, there are those who think that what we have here in this strange appearance of Melchizedek in the Old Testament, that this is a pre-incarnation manifestation of Christ, of the second person of the Trinity. Then you look in the book of Joshua, another strange encounter that takes place, where we read in Joshua 5, this passage, verse 13, it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and he looked, and behold, a man, in my English translation, they have man spelled with a capital M. Behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? I mean, all of a sudden, here's this apparently mighty warrior who shows up that Joshua doesn't know. He's never seen him before. He had no military intelligence of a warrior like this that was going to be fighting for the opposing forces. And when he sees this warrior, he says, who are you? Are you with us or our enemies? And you notice how the answer comes. No. No. Now wait a minute, you got to either be for us or for them. Who are you for? No. I'm not for either one of you. But rather, as commander, as the army of the Lord, or captain of the Lord of hosts, I have now come. I'm from God, Joshua. And what did Joshua do? Joshua fell on his face on the earth and worshiped and said, what does my Lord say to his servant? And then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. The same instructions that had been given to Moses at the burning bush. Take off your shoes or off your feet, for the ground whereon you stand is holy ground. And this we see as a Christophany, the second person of the Trinity, appearing in history before the conquest of the promised land. Or let's look further, if you will, in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. The expression of his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning, fiery furnace. So these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning, fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the ones who threw them into the fire. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning, fiery furnace. And then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. And he rose in haste and he spoke, saying to his counselor, didn't we cast 3 men bound into the midst of this fire? And they answered and said to him, true, O king. And Nebuchadnezzar said, look, I see 4 men loose in there, walking around in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Christophany, I believe. Second person of the Trinity came into the fire where his servants Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and protected them from all harm. In the Old Testament, the Shekinah glory and the burning fire that manifested not only Christophany, but back to theophany, occurs also in the episode of the translation of Elijah into heaven. You remember when his servant Elisha went with him begging for a double portion of the Spirit that had been upon him, and he said, will you come along with thee? If you see me depart, then you know, well, that will come to pass. And at the end of their journey, behold, a chariot of fire appeared in the heavens. And Elisha looked at it and he said to Elijah, my father, the chariot of God. Again, that chariot of fire manifested the divine glory. This was another manifestation of Shekinah that surrounded the presence of God. Again, the chariot of fire was God's mobile throne. His throne was not seen inert, fixed, stationary at some corner in heaven, but his throne could go wherever he wanted it to go. And wherever his throne went, his glory went. And his glory burst out in this radiance of light and of fire. One last one. of those. The first chapter of Ezekiel, one of the most enigmatic chapters in all of the Bible, where Ezekiel speaks of his vision of God. It came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captains by the river Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. Verse 4, I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, and brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the color of amber out of the midst of the fire. The whirling Merkabah, the wheels within the wheels of Ezekiel. Again, a vision of that throne chariot of God surrounded with the splendor of his glory. The burning bush, where Moses first glimpses the Shekinah, is not the last episode. Throughout the book of Exodus, God appears again and again as he leads the people of Israel through the wilderness, through the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. Now, the book of Exodus ends after the tabernacle has been built and established, before it is beginning to be used for worship. First, the glory of God comes and descends into the tabernacle. So when the Shekinah is there, Moses knows that God is there, and it is time for the people to consecrate themselves for worship. But here's the question I want to ask you. We talk about this refulgence, this brilliant, radiant, blinding light that is so intense. The magnitude of the light so bright, it blinds people and causes fear and trembling to come on. Now my question for you is this: what causes this light? I said earlier that the glory of God comes from his inner being. The Shekinah is the outward manifestation of the inward majesty of God. But where does the light come from? What gives it its hue, its transcendent, majestic refulgence? Where does it come from? The author of Hebrews answers that question when it speaks of Christ, where he describes Christ as the brightness of his glory. Christ is the visible manifestation of the eternal glory of God. Christ in his divine nature is the Shekinah. He's the one who lights up the light, who gives the fire and the flame to the glory of God. That's an incredible thing. You can think about that for the rest of your days and never begin to get to the bottom of the depths of that Christ is the brightness of his glory. That is to say, the logical conclusion would be, if there is no Christ, if there is no second person of the Trinity, then there's only darkness in God. One last point, quickly. The Hellenistic Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria made a connection not from a Christian viewpoint, but from a philosophical viewpoint, between the Greek concept of the idea of the Logos The Logos was this transcendent principle that gave order and meaning and purpose to the universe in Greek philosophy. And Philo tied the concept of the Logos to the Shekinah. And then you come to the New Testament and the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. That the Logos is the godness of God, the very brightness of his glory.
Good. So, what do you think about that? The handout I gave you. So R.C. mentions a couple. This is from the first chapter of the Angel of the Lord book that I was telling you about. And that's by what's it? Doug Van Dorn and Matt Foreman. They're both pastors, by the way, in addition to being scholars. They go into so this is, like I said, just kind of an intro to the book, and so they cite a couple instances of these Christophanies, and they're fairly convicted that these things are Christophanies. So they make no bones about that. But they cite a couple others that R.C. didn't cover. Exodus 23. There's Judges 2. And so on. So I encourage you to, if you're really captivated by what I'm presenting with this today, you can see the angel of the Lord is no angel, right? This is something beyond that. And Malachi 3. And so they go into a little bit of a discussion about their method and so on. And then Heiser's book has a chapter called Important Angels. And, he talks about the angel of Yahweh. He talks about the destroying angel of the Passover. And then he talks about a couple of the other angels. But he leads with the angel of the Lord. So that's interesting material there. I really got started on that whole thing by this chapter in Dr. Jeremiah's book, The Greatest Angel. He starts off, I'll just read to you his opening paragraph. There are angels, and then there's the angel. Now we come to the greatest mystery of all in our study here together, the one who is called the angel of the Lord. No doubt you've already noticed that often in an Old Testament passage, the angel who's speaking is identified directly with God himself. The angel seems not just to be from the Lord, but actually to be the Lord. As we walk against the scripture, let's focus our mental lens on this question. Could this be the Lord himself appearing in these encounters? And the first one he cites is in Genesis, where the angel of the Lord found Hagar. Remember, Hagar was, and so in their conversation, the angel makes a promise that sounds straight from God. I will increase your descendants so they will be too numerous to count. That's Genesis 16:10. And as Hagar heard this promise, who did she think she was seeing and hearing? Verse 13 tells us. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I now have seen the one who sees me. So he goes and has other sightings in this chapter, again, pointing to Christophanies, instances of Christ in the Old Testament. So,
How many did you say, Rick?
how many instances are cited? I didn't have a number. It's a lot. It depends on who's doing the counting. The guys that wrote the big thick book I'm getting should come maybe tomorrow. I wanted to have it today so I could show you how big and thick the book is. They probably have a count.
R.C. made a pretty strong point. He said Christ is the physical manifestation of God in the Old Testament, but not the exclusive physical manifestation of God, is he? For instance,
I don't think he makes that case
the
quite.
exception would be the burning bush. Was or was not Christ. Okay, maybe, yeah,
Kind of an open question.
okay.
It seems to me, that my takeaway from this so far as I've gone into this material is that, when God says no man can see me and live, he wasn't kidding. But that's sort of God the Father,
Mhm.
I don't want to say, I don't like the word filtered, but kind of unbound glory would just kind of obliterate you. But Christ in human, being, again, it's sort of that, particularly after the resurrection, is accessible to us without, us being kind of burned away or whatever.
And now we're saying in human form and in angelic form.
Well, again, the angel of the Lord is just is a turn of phrase, I think,
Right.
as opposed to equating him with the angels as creatures. He's not created; he's the creator, and he's he's sort of he's the commander. He's the Lord of hosts, right? So he is the commander of that whole created group, that whole created category of angels. Those are the ones that show up with him on the hillsides around when he chooses to reveal them to I'm trying to remember who it was now, but it was one of the Old Testament biblical figures who needed to see that he had backup.
Servant, though.
Yeah, he had backup, right? So
Chariots. Yeah.
so
Didn't Moses see the back of God on the mountain as he passed by?
yes. Yeah, that's what he saw. He saw his hind quarters. Remember, that's how it's phrased in the Old English,
Face, but
the old King James version. So again, was that Christ?
there was
But Christ before he's resurrected.
Yeah.
So I just find it fascinating, and the thing that is to me kind of encouraging is that Christ has been involved in human history from the get-go. Not like he just showed up at Christmas. He's been there the whole time. And then the whole notion that, again, I didn't dig into it too much, but, this idea that Jewish theology and thinking before Christ had this sort of idea of more than one person in the Godhead. They didn't have the Trinity, but the Trinity is really showing up in the Old Testament. So, I think that again, the Trinity is always there. And maybe we just haven't seen it. And one of the things that the authors I've been reading talk about is how the early church up and through medieval times talked about this. We don't talk about this in the modern Christian church, So this is sort of, eye-opening to me. I don't know about you, but
Yeah, I've never.
right. Any thoughts or discussions or questions?
Really just a question. If you go to John, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and who created the earth? Was it Jesus or was it God the Father? And because the term is used, God in the,
Yeah.
The answer is yes.
That's one of my shoebox questions, because it's not taking away from God, but as we read through the scripture and see that the manifestations of God are Jesus through the Old Testament, through the New Testament, and it doesn't take away from the Holy Spirit, because when Jesus arose and left us, he left us the Holy Spirit.
Well, we hear about
Replace.
the Holy Spirit in the creation story, don't we?
Right at the beginning of
Right,
Genesis.
the spirit
Covered over
over the water.
over the waters of the deep.
Right.
So, they're all there.
Yeah.
And it's a question of, well, which person in the Godhead had what role?
Right.
Did the Father conceive of the creation? Christ carried it out along with the Spirit? I don't know. Shoebox question, right? Bring your shoebox to heaven and let's have a chat. I think, that's the part to me about, heaven. That's part of it. That's one part of it. That's exciting. I get to ask the author of creation, I hope, how did you do that?
But the really important thing is that from the beginning of history, as we know it, Jesus has been there.
That's the point. Right.
That's
To me, that was the big takeaway from this, is that he's always been there.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Christmas. He shows up as a baby,
Right.
lives for 33 years or whatever it was, 33 years, right? I think that's right. And then, goes up to heaven. He's been there the whole time. And, I should have known that. I mean, I should have really, but this to me really made it more concrete. So that for me was a real blessing. And now I just, I can't get enough. I got to dig into this.
Yeah.
And then RC talked a little bit about Shekinah. Now, who knows what the word refulgent means? Does anybody know what that? He uses that word a couple times. It's the things I've heard him say. I looked it up. Refulgence is like ultra brightness, like brightness that is you can't withstand.
Like the sun.
So when he talks about the refulgent glory of God, he's talking about a brightness of light and that is overwhelming and almost intolerable to humans. So I thought that was, it's like, I'm gonna look that word.
And the darkness kind of, or kind of like.
Not even close. Right. So, yeah. So I've heard that word and use that word. It's like, what does he mean by that? He uses these big words. What does that mean? So I thought I'd share that one with you because that you can just fly right past that one. Like, what? Some fancy word some theologians use. I don't say the whole lot. All right. So
Definition of the word don't match.
any other comments or questions or?
If you want to know about the burning bush, is it Christophany, just look at Exodus 3, the first 5 verses,
You want to read it?
right there. Now Moses was keeping the flock also, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning yet not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, here I am. Don't come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. That's exactly what it was.
So
I just had well, I don't know how you take it, but I just watched Men in Black. And it just gave me an analogy then for Christ. When this alien comes to Earth, he crawls into a human body and takes it over to get his task on Earth done. And then when he's ready to leave, he leaves that human body and goes back in his own shape. I said, so there's the example of what Christ did. He came down, crawled into a human body, did his work on Earth, and then when he was done, left that body.
But he didn't leave the body. The body went with him. He went up.
That's true. That's true. But
I mean, Christ is fully human.
Yeah,
Right.
and is today.
He always
In
is.
heaven.
Right.
But he wasn't before. He wasn't before the incarnation. He wasn't. Um,
What Joe just read, take your sandals off. If the sandal is made of fiber, that fiber has to be killed and dead to make the shoe.
Hmm.
If the shoe is made of leather, the animal has to be killed and it's a thing that is dead.
Hmm.
So I can see now why having that removed, and it just came to me now,
Hmm.
just having that removed is important because then you are part of the earth, of part of the burning bush too. The cycle of life is direct.
That's a great observation. Where'd you come up with that?
Just now.
Just now.
Comes up stuff out of his head all the time.
That's a great observation. It's
Kind of an argument for nudist colonies. too.
Well, I mean, they're only standing on the ground, they're not lying on the ground. If he's lying on the ground, that might be a different.
Leave it to Gamble to come up with that one. Huh?
Yeah, well,
Well, and my other shoebox question is, God willing, I get to heaven. Am I going to care about my shoebox question?
Right.
why not?
Why not?
Oh, one, I might be relieved of the triteness of curiosity. That's one possibility. And the other thing is just so in awe that it never comes to mind again.
Yeah, I think.
God willing, you get to heaven.
He's got a little bit. He's got a little bit.
I turn it around and say, part of the worship that I give will be wanting to know more. And includes what you might call, or you might consider yourself to be a trite question.
Right.
But it's part, it's part of that discovery of, and enjoyment and thoroughness of delight in God's creation and learning more about it. So I look at all those questions as forms of worship, basically saying to God, you are magnificent. You are beyond my wildest imagination. I want to know more about you. I want to acknowledge who you are and what you've done. That's worship, right? That's worship. Acknowledging God for who he is and what he has done. That's worship. So when we talk about the new heaven and the new earth, we're talking about everything around us and appreciating and understanding where it came from, how it holds together, and attributing that to the creator. That'll be our worship in heaven. Remember we talked about that in the heaven series?
Well, you understand, Rich, that you may have to wait a few millennia before you ask that question.
Eternity's a long time. Millennium might seem like a day.
and
So,
there's the possibility that once we're there, we automatically have the answers to these questions, which creates that awe of God.
well, one of the things we have to be careful, we're not going to know everything.
No, but I mean,
We'll get
But our
to-
questions.
We'll get to know a lot, and we'll continue to know a lot. We'll have a whole eternity to learn it and take it in, which to me is exciting. That's why I say heaven's not going to be boring. I just can't, it's not going to be boring. It's going to be this constant confrontation of wonder and discovery and
Enlightenment.
and appreciation of who he is. All right, so it's getting on to 10 o'clock. I want to make sure we get the, y'all are planning on coming for the next series?
Maybe. Yeah, depends how much Larry enjoys his book here.
I'm gonna put Larry to work.
Okay.
Anyway, bless Manny's heart, he got right on this and they came. And I was silly and like trying to find the first chapter and copy it, get it put together in a document. Like, what am I doing? We got the books.
Oh, I think we have a.
Refuse something.
Everybody's got one here?
I think when we're all walking into heaven, Jesus, the guy's gonna say, any questions? Every hand is gonna go up. Every hand, they're gonna say, okay.
Take a number.
Take a number, right? All right. We'll have our handouts. Each will have an individualized handout of all the questions, all the answers to all the questions.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew what questions you wanted. I knew.
Join, is the Parent Oasis group gonna join us since Manny was involved in this?
No.
I was thinking that would be kind of fun.
Yeah. We're trying to figure out some ways to intersect with that group a little bit. We haven't figured it out yet quite, but we're working in that direction.
Okay.
We'd like to see
Well, you can tell them I asked.
more cross pollination.
I'll tell them. You're right.
So.
You know, the interesting thing that just hit me with what she was saying, the Shekinah glory is Christ.
Yeah.
Well, the Shekinah glory left the Jews.
Yeah.
It went away. You people are so bad. I'm out of here for the church. And it has not returned as far as the Jews know.
Right.
But it did return in terms of the body of Christ.
And the temple's gone, right? There's no holy of holies for that presence.
Grace, I knew it was a case for grace.
The Shekinah glory came to earth and lived his 33 years and left us a legacy so that we can get the Shekinah glory
Right.
in our hearts.
Yeah, and when I think about what you're just saying, I'm thinking also about the transfiguration event.
Yeah. All right.
Transconfiguration.
That's another instance where there's, the covers are, the curtains pulled back a little bit. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Who is this? And so on. So, that's all I got. 10 o'clock.
Rich, in relation